Over the last dozen segments of TechKnow, we've tackled interesting, relevant, pragmatic technical topics in some detail. In this segment, however, we're going to explore some more esoteric and fun little asides that we're going to call Techno Trivia. We're going to hunt down the drop frames and drop frame timecode, show you why 24 frame per second film really isn't 24 frames per second, debunk the myths surrounding the naming of the B and C connection, resurrect the Laserdisc, and even visit Fraggle Rock. The broadcast television specification in the United States was defined in the 1950s by the NTSC. Due to some odd technical limitations, it just was not possible to display a television signal with a frame rate that matched an even 60 Hz or 30 frames per second. The brilliant engineering solution was to tweak the rate just a tiny bit to 29.97 frames per second. Synchronizing this strange decimal frame rate with real-world clocks is not entirely straightforward, but it's important if you want frame-accurate editing and if you want your audio to remain in sync with your video. And so we have an equally strange way of counting frames of NTSC video known as SMPTE drop frame timecode. SMPTE drop frame displays frame numbers like this: hours, minutes, seconds, semicolon, and frames. The semicolon indicates that this is drop frame timecode, which might raise the question, where does that drop frame go, and doesn't this screw up my video? Drop frame timecode does not actually drop any frames of video at all. Instead, it's just a method for counting the frames, and in the counting, 2 frame numbers are skipped every minute, so that the next frame after frame 29 is frame 2 instead of frame 0 as you might expect. They should really call it drop number timecode, but nothing is really ever that simple in video production, is it? Actually, it's not here either. The real rule for numbering frames in SMPTE drop frame timecode is that the frame numbers 00 and 01 are skipped every minute, except for minutes ending in 0, for example, the 1st minute and the 10th minute, and so on. The point is that no frames are actually dropped. You can let your software worry about counting them. We all know that movie theaters project film at a 24 frame per second frame rate. While there are great artistic reasons to pursue 24p video, the initial decision to go with 24 frames per second nearly 80 years ago was a simple one. That's the slowest possible rate that sound can be encoded on film. Since film stock is very expensive, 24 frames per second was initially a miserly and pragmatic choice and not an aesthetic one. Film doesn't just slide across the lens in a continuous stream in a projector. This would only create a top to bottom blur on the screen. Instead, a frame is pulled into a gate and held there for a moment, 24 times a second, with the shutter blocking the lamp while the film is in transit into the gate. It turns out, however, that displaying pictures on a screen at a rate of 24 Hz is simply too slow for the human visual perceptual system, which can detect a distinct and annoying flicker at that speed. To solve this issue, film projectors in theaters have mechanical shutters that rotate in front of the lamp with a flicker reducing rate of 2 or 3 times the frame rate. This means that you're actually seeing 48 or 72 images a second, even though the frame rate is indeed 24 frames per second. The BNC connector is a type of RF connector used with coaxial cable. The connector uses a bayonet-style locking mechanism and can be found in professional electronic gear of all sorts, including professional video hardware. The signal it can transmit is not unlike the component video signal you'll find on consumer AV equipment, but the coaxial cable and the locking mechanism make it much more robust. Just what does the initialism BNC stand for? It's smaller than an N-type connector named for the engineer and inventor Paul Neal, so maybe it stands for Baby N connector. The connection was also extensively used by the British Navy and is sometimes called a British naval connector. Then again, the BNC connector has been extensively used by almost everyone, and it was invented by American engineers Paul Neal and Carl Councilman almost 40 years ago. The B is pretty easy. It stands for bayonet. One nickname for the BNC is the bayonet nut connector. The most common explanation of what BNC stands for, from old engineering textbooks to the brand new Wikipedia, is that it's named after Neal and Councilman. Bayonet Neal Councilman. This makes some sense since the N connector was invented by Neal and the C connector was invented by Mr. Councilman. But wouldn't it make more grammatical sense to call it a Neal Councilman bayonet connector? We discussed the technology of mats and masks in an earlier segment of TechKnow. The earliest examples of mats are the glass matte paintings used in the backgrounds in films. One step more complex than a stilled glass matte painting is a matte that moves or travels in the background. In your editing software, when you want to use an animated digital matte that moves, you'll often access a feature or effects or menu item that might be called a track matte key or a traveling matte. The 1980s Jim Henson show Fraggle Rock featured a character named Matt who traveled to faraway lands to explore outer space. His full name? Traveling Matt, of course. Did you catch the name of Traveling Matt's nephew too? Yep, Gobo. Gobos, or cookies, are lighting tools that Perry Jenkins discussed in EP 105 of Production Notes. Before HD, DVD, and Blu-ray discs, before DVD video discs, and yes, even before CD audio discs were introduced in 1983, Hollywood distributed movies on Laserdiscs. The Laserdisc was invented back in 1958, and the first discs arrived on the market in 1978, nearly 20 years before DVD movies exploded into our living rooms. Laserdiscs are far superior to videotape in both quality and convenience, since they're random access and don't need to be rewound. Sounds an awful lot like an older and bigger version of DVD video discs, doesn't it? But actually, Laserdiscs are much more closely related to an even more ancient technology, the vinyl phonograph record. Superficially, Laserdiscs and LP records are the same size, but they are also technically similar on a much deeper groove. Just like record albums, Laserdiscs are analog. That's all the TechKnow trivia we have time for today. I hope you filed a few factoids away that you can bore your relatives with at your next family gathering. Until the next time, the TechKnow team is still here, as always, to answer your more serious and pressing questions. So feel free to drop us a line or send us a note.
That's another adventure from Gobo's uncle, Traveling Matt.
That was wonderful!
Yes.
Wasn't that wonderful, Gobo?
Yes.
That was wonderful, Gobo's
Yes.
Uncle Matt!